Thanks for joining our webinar today. We have an interesting discussion about business impact analysis, or BIA for short. We'll cover what a BIA is and why it's integral to your disaster recovery planning. We'll also give you tips on what to include in your BIA and how to estimate costs if you were to experience a loss of business operations. I'm Trista Perot, Marketing Director for Global Data Vault, a Dataprise company, getting us started with just a few housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. So the webinar is going to run close to an hour, but we'll be sure and leave time for questions at the end, and we absolutely want your questions. While everyone is set to listen-only mode, we want to hear from you. I'll be monitoring chat along with a couple of my colleagues, and we'll either answer the questions in the moment or be sure and circle back and answer them at the end. The webinar is being recorded in case you just love it so much and want to watch it again. Or maybe you have to leave early. You'll get that link after the session. It'll be available on our website, or you can watch it via our YouTube channel anytime. So quickly, before I start, let me set the stage for who we are. If you've known us as Global Data Vault, we are now a division of Dataprise, which is a managed IT service provider for mid-market businesses. We provide leading IT solutions to organizations across the United States. Dataprise believes that unbeatable IT solutions and services are what allow our clients to shine at what they do, and we deliver those across a range of offerings that include, but are not limited to, managed cybersecurity, managed user, 24/7 help desk, managed infrastructure, and so much more. We strive to be the end-to-end technology partner for our clients. Some of you in the audience know us as Global Data Vault. We are the BCDR division of Dataprise. We continue to be a Veeam Platinum Cloud Services provider, offering fully managed disaster recovery as a service, backup as a service, and Microsoft 365 backup solutions. We're specialists when it comes to Veeam, and we're proud to say that we have a deep expertise, including Veeam architects and a Veeam Vanguard on staff. So speaking of that special Veeam Vanguard, let me start introducing our speakers. Today we have Stephen New, Operations Director for Global Data Vault, and he is our Veeam Vanguard. Always has sage advice on how to protect your business. We have Kelly Colwell, Senior Service Transition Manager for Dataprise, and he's leading our discussion with our special guest, Tom Shay, who is a vCIO for Dataprise. Tom's role as a virtual CIO is really interesting in that he provides a fresh set of eyes when solving tough IT problems. But with that, he has a great depth of experience from his many and varied client projects. Tom, we are so happy to have you today. Can you help me explain a little bit better what the role of a vCIO is?
Absolutely. Thank you, Trista. The vCIO role is becoming a lot more mainstream these days within IT managed service providers. And as you said, it basically is a strategic advisor. It's someone who assists a firm, a client, with what their not only IT path is and can be continued going forward, but we help that with a business path as well. We provide value on many different fronts within the IT world. Your infrastructure, your operations as a whole, applications, security and risk. There's many things that we can provide information and advice on. What I've noticed in my time here at Dataprise that sets them apart from any other IT MSP is while we are here to fill in a gap that might be something that's not what you have within your current firm, our role is not specifically to just kind of recommend only Dataprise solutions. What we'll do is we'll look at what it is that you're looking for and make a recommendation based not just on what Dataprise can do, but what's best for your firm and your company. And if it's something that Dataprise actually doesn't necessarily have a strength in, we have other recommendations for you. One of the other great things about what a Dataprise vCIO does is we don't work with only our recurring clientele, any clientele with recurring contracts. We're happy to do projects specific to your needs on a quote unquote one-off basis. So those are some of the things that Dataprise vCIO services can do for you.
That's cool, Tom, and welcome to the show, if you will. A lot of organizations don't necessarily have CIOs, right? So it's nice to have somebody who can bring a breadth of experience to them. And one of those particular areas, as we're discussing today, is the business impact analysis, right?
Yeah.
And we love our friends at Veeam and Jason Buffington, shout out at JBuff on the social things. He had this quote that says, business impact analysis starts in a boardroom and not in the data center. So typically when we think of disaster recovery, we tend to hone in on the disaster or the data center components, right? The technicalities and the servers and the this and the that's, without really understanding what happens when systems go down or what kind of impact, a server or an application being down will have on an organization. And it varies from organizations of all size, right? So what we're going to discuss today is what the business impact analysis does from both financial impact with stakeholders, employees, et cetera, and just to give folks a better idea of how it can help their organization. So as we move on and we talk about the purpose, Stephen, when we're talking about the purpose of a BIA, can you run us through these 3 items here?
Yeah, so a BIA basically measures impact and risk of your company. So during a BIA, you're going to need to find out how much money you're going to lose, what impact you're going to have on stakeholders, customers. I mean, how much capital can you afford to lose during a disaster that would put your company out of business, essentially? And those are some of the things that you measure during a BIA. Another thing that you need to, or another process or procedure, is you need a BCDR plan. BCDR plan is how to address those risk based on the BIA that you get. I mean, you're going to need to measure the impact and risk and then go to your BCDR and how do I stop those risks if we are in a disaster situation. Another one is a run book. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to create the BIA, business impact analysis, get a BCDR plan, business continuity disaster recovery plan in place. And then based on those 2 processes or documents, you're going to need to create a run book, which is going to be an action plan, is the best I can describe it. So it's basically an execution of procedures and policies that you create based off your BIA and BCDR plan. And then you're going to need an incident manager, response manager who's in charge of the run book. And he is going to follow the procedures in that run book and delegate the tasks based on what your company needs.
Yeah, it's all subjective, right? What works or what impacts one organization won't be the same for another organization. So when we talk about things like RTOs and RPOs, and everybody has the whole 5 nines thing, right? I believe I've mentioned before that the more 9s you add on there, the more zeros after the $ tend to get added on to the bill of that. So a lot of times customers will back down on how many 9s they need, or you do this type of an activity to specify it to certain applications or certain processes for an organization. That'll help you kind of fine tune that. So if your RTOs, your return to operations are X for a system, perhaps you need to invest more money in the business continuity or the disaster recovery planning for that versus every server and every application that you have, right? And it all kind of goes back to how much money you want to spend. So Tom, can you walk us through this infographic? I guess it kind of is here.
Yeah, exactly. So what we do as part of our business impact analysis service or workshop is go through, what applications, what services, what it is that's, of importance to you. Well, I shouldn't say, we try to go through all and then actually tier what's most important and what's least important and figure out what an objective, right, for recovery time and a recovery data point is, and then kind of add to that what the actual, so an RTA and an RPA, and see where there might be gaps for you. And within that process, if you don't go through this business impact analysis, it's been shown that when something does happen, and you need to go through an action plan, more times than not, it's harder to go through that process properly without the run book, as Stephen mentioned, and without the process and procedures outlined for you. And there's an obvious cost to that. So also, as Kelly mentioned, kind of outlining those tier 1, tier 2s, or even, down to tier 4, so that exactly, where your budget should be moved to, depending on how to narrow that RTO with the RTA, the objective with the actual.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the percentages there aren't small. I mean, 34% and 27% gaps in what you can do or what you can deliver, what your expectations are, is pretty significant, especially if you're talking about millions of dollars of downtime outage costs, et cetera. So thinking about types of outages, what we might consider of that. Stephen, can you tell us about some different scenarios? I know we've seen some of these, but what are your experiences?
Yeah, so I mean, we have seen extended outages of hardware. An example is customer SAN fails. Everybody knows that there's some hardware delays with COVID. It could be a couple months before you get a SAN back in there. So we do see extended outages from hardware. We don't really see too many extended outages for internet, but you do need to plan for that. So what I say whenever I speak to customers about BIAs, you need to go into this with the mindset of what do I do if my building does not exist? Because essentially we have seen that with customers. We've seen hurricanes, fires, natural disasters, tornadoes. I mean, any natural disaster has the potential to destroy your infrastructure and or building. So you need to come in with a mindset of what do I do if my building doesn't exist? You also have rogue employees or bad actors. So somebody gets a hold of your system, gets onto your system that's not authorized and starts deleting your data. We've seen that in the past as well. Somebody gets inside your vCenter server and goes and deletes VMs is an example of that. And nobody's favorite is ransomware. Ransomware does exist. It is considered a disaster when it encrypts all your data that you can't access anymore. So you need to come up with a plan. And I like to come at it with a mindset of when creating your BIA, you need to look at it. Your building doesn't exist. None of your hardware exists. What do I do?
Yeah, and if you caught our last webinar, we talked about, what happens when disaster recovery is activated during all of this. And we had that example, right? The one company's building was on fire. They came and they didn't have anything. So it can happen in a lot of different ways. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how we calculate that type of impact. So we obviously know that there's direct and indirect costs. Sometimes we don't think about things like employees being impacted. Tom, from a revenue, from overly obvious to the not so obvious, what do you see in this area?
Some of these impacts right here, these direct impacts are somewhat obvious, right? If your infrastructure is down, if your customers can't reach you, whatever it may be, depending on the industry, obviously there's going to be a loss of revenue. And in some ways, it's a potential permanent loss of revenue. If now you've put a customer in a position where they have the opportunity to choose another firm, that's where we pointed out and highlighted permanent loss of revenue. Obvious loss of productivity, things are down, your people aren't working, things aren't moving forward. Those are kind of obvious as well. Operating costs. What's mentioned in this example here is, in a situation where maybe you don't have the proper backups and everything is all in one area and now that data is lost. Now you have to kind of recreate that. And if that's possible, that's certainly an additional operating expense that no one wants. If it's not possible, that could be a much bigger problem, potentially even a compliance issue, depending on the type of firm that we're talking about. And speaking of compliance, then there's obviously the ability to incur financial penalties, depending on whether it's, with one of your other clients that you have a service level agreement with that you can't meet. You might now incur a financial penalty there, or it could be, as I said, with a compliance issue, you could now have some sort of financial penalty within a government agency that's hitting you up for something that you're no longer compliant with. So these are the direct costs.
Yeah, so carrying that on into a little bit of the goodwill and compliance, health and safety, et cetera.
So now these are the more indirect costs, right? So again, customers can't reach, your website, they can't reach you, your phone system's down, whatever it is that they normally do to get to your products or services, you have the ability to lose customers. Also, though, when staff is unproductive and they see that, the reasoning for unproductive is that, the planning wasn't there, you could lose good people in that sense. So there's that staff goodwill that's lost. Also, in a situation where potentially your payroll system goes down, not too many people I know that are interested in working for free. So that's another way to potentially, lose some good staff, and then obviously business partners as well. Again, your accounting system goes down. You can't pay, your business partners, people that are bringing in goods to assist your business. That's going to be an issue as well. And then again, compliance, health and safety. I mentioned compliance a little bit. But health and safety, of course, there's an example here about disconnected security cameras, but just in general, In thinking about one of my clients in the healthcare industry, if they lose the ability to reach their systems that nurses and doctors need to get patient information, well, that's a huge health and safety issue and certainly a compliance issue as well. So there's just many of the, kind of indirect impacts that not planning properly can cause you.
Yeah, and some of those things you might even think of, just stretching examples a little bit. If you have a door control system on a sensitive facility, something that keeps the doors locked, I imagine that there's always ways for the employees to get out, right? You wouldn't be able to have a code or meet code if your employees couldn't get out, unless it was a prison, then they wouldn't be employees, hopefully. But anything like that could potentially put somebody at risk that folks need to think of. If you have a gate control system that allows trucks or employees in and out of a facility or in and out of an area, if that's part of your business, you have to include everything and think outside the box. Like if your business is loading trucks with gravel, right? And those trucks can't get to the place where they load the gravel because some system failed, there's an issue. And that simply could be, all right, you're going to go out there and stand and you're going to open the gate every time a truck needs to go through, right? But that's at least a plan, and that's thinking ahead. And it's the kind of thing that you need to do for these impact analyses is really dig down and think about what it is that we could impact or what could be impacted by an outage. So with that, let's talk about the business impact analysis elements. Stephen.
Yeah, so you're going to need to identify any networks, applications, and systems that would be impacted if you were to experience a DR event or a disaster. And then once you identify the applications, network, system, I'm also going to add in hardware to that as well, because if you're, like I said, we're going to approach this in a mindset if your building does not exist. So, you need to take an inventory of your hardware, your switches, what is where. And then after you gather this information, you're going to need to identify the risk to business operations should anything be compromised. Once you get that data, then you can estimate the cost if operations were to go offline. Is it going to cost $100,000 a day? Is it going to cost $1 million a day? That could be, I know that's a big gap there, but you're going to need to understand the cost of what it would take to take your business out of business, essentially. And then you're going to need to identify the gaps in the recovery strategy. But first, you need to make sure that you have a recovery strategy. That's the most important thing. If you don't have a recovery strategy, hence the BCDR plan or the playbook or run books, you're going to need to identify the gaps in those strategies. If you don't have one, you need to create a recovery strategy so that you can get your business back online, operating as quickly as possible, so you don't lose those $1 million a day, $100,000 a day, $500,000 a day. You need to get up as quickly as possible.
That kind of goes back to the boardroom and not data center mindset. It makes me think of examples from personal experience where you ask somebody what systems are located in a particular facility, and you kind of get one of these where they're shuffling around papers and they're trying to find their spreadsheets or whatever, and nobody really knows. And a lot of times, unfortunately, people don't find out exactly what's in there until they're down or something happens with that building. Or like Stephen says, the building doesn't exist anymore. So just make sure that you're engaging the correct people as you have these conversations. The stakeholders are identified, that you know where all of these systems are, that you know what the impact would be on those if they're down. We have a customer who has quite a few locations, and sometimes they kind of run as silos on their own. And maybe certain systems in one location mean a lot more to them than they would in another location. And you need to make sure that you've identified those appropriately, which leads us into the scope of the BIA. Tom, when Stephen mentioned filling the gaps, and there's a lot of gaps that we have to fill. We're obviously not going to be able to fill all of them. How do we go about doing this when we talk with customers?
Yeah. So through the business impact analysis, through, our workshops or, kind of interviews with the clients, this is where we are able to, again, kind of tier what's most important and least important to that client. And that's where we can identify where the gaps are, where those RTOs or RPOs do not meet RTAs and RPAs, where there might be a system that, does not have a proper backup solution. So if it's down, that's an issue. Thinking again of one of my other clients, one of my clients is an assisted living facility. And, one of their main concerns is their telephony. And unfortunately, all of their telephony is in one place. And that was identified through our BIA exercise. So this was something that they realized, was an issue. But as you put here, not all gaps must be filled, right? So in the sense, where the issue is in that particular case is the telephony systems where outside emergency services need to reach people within, the medical field or within that particular client. That needs to be obviously up and running. And so that's a major issue. As far as the particular residents are concerned, that might be something that's not as high a priority as making sure, emergency and medical services are working properly. So these are the things that we can do, kind of going through the slide a bit. We will look at specific applications. We'll look at specific services. We will work with you, define and prioritize those based on your assessment of what you feel in your firm is the proper way to point those out. And then from there, we can kind of work on, again, where there might be gaps. And we can actually put dollar amounts to those so that you not only see the impact of, losing a particular service or application, but what that could mean specifically in dollars.
So that's a perfect segue into the next slide. We've talked about the elements, the reasons, the costs, direct and indirect, the impacts. So this is sort of a template or an example. It's not really real world numbers per se, but it just kind of shows how these types of things can be put together in a usable format. So I know part of the page is cut out, right? It's just a little bit of a chart here, but can you walk us through a little bit of what this looks like? I see we have scoring scales and costs and impacts. So take us through this.
So without giving away all of the Dataprise secret sauce, this is kind of a snippet of what we do when we go through a business impact analysis workshop. So again, there is a few columns here not shown where we highlight and list out exactly what services are that are important to you or what services that you have, and then kind of tier them as to importance or not importance. We include applications within that. That would also include things like accounting systems, payroll, you name it, and again, in the medical field, medical dispensary systems, just thinking off the top of my head, but every industry obviously has their own particular system that might be, more or less important. So the score here kind of goes through exactly what that particular client will feel when we're going through the workshop, where that particular service or application should be listed. Again, we do have a sort of scale on exactly what that could mean revenue-wise. This is for a particular example. This would obviously be adjusted depending on the client that it is. And then we talk about, as we spoke about earlier, the direct cost impacts and the goodwill impacts, right? When a payroll system is down, what impact does it have on your internal staff? When, your website is unreachable, what does that have on your customers, so on and so forth. So this is just, again, kind of a snippet of what we'll go through when we do a business impact analysis for you.
That's pretty cool stuff. So as the vCIO or a vCIO for Dataprise, this is a service that you participate in or any number of folks, right? So how long do you think something like this normally takes?
Well, that's dependent on what you're looking for. And again, one of the benefits I feel of Dataprise is that we are flexible in our offerings of this. So we can do this as a one-off exercise I spoke about earlier, where, if a client is just looking to do this business impact analysis and learn how to do it for their own internal staff, we can use this as a beginning kind of step for that client, but also a teaching method. And then, give that client all of our, final data and reports. And, through the process, if their IT team joins us throughout the whole thing, they have the ability then to continue on themselves with updating it as their infrastructure changes. Or we can create a service where, we're the ones kind of doing the ongoing analysis. And there are different ways that can go about, where we can have a reoccurring, service with that particular client, and we'll update it either annually or on a continual basis. So it's really up to the client what they're looking for, what will work best for their particular business.
Right. And obviously you guys have a lot of expertise and certifications to go along with it. So it's not just somebody that, hey, you read some articles and this is what you think, right? This is all real world stuff. And that's why we wanted you to join and share your views on this particular topic today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Wonderful team. We have, now we have people across the entire country. All of them have, various certifications. But not only that, there's a lot of real world experience. I'm not the only 20-year vet of the IT world. There are a few of us that have that much experience. And that not only brings about, kind of that real world, that knowledge of things that have happened in the past. I can speak to Superstorm Sandy and other things of that nature that, certainly this is something that, would be very helpful to those types of clients. But there's also the amount of other clientele that we have that has kind of given us some paths that when your company comes in, we can say, oh, we've already seen this with, XYZ client, and this could be very helpful to you. So that's one of the other benefits of Dataprise as a managed service provider is kind of utilizing some of the things that other clients have done that can now, kind of be brought forward to your business.
So let's talk about getting started real quick with the BIA plan, right? Stephen, do you want to recap us at all?
Yeah, the main thing that we need to recap is, first of all, you do need a BIA. That's very important. You're going to need to create a BCDR plan, and then you're going to need to create a run book. Without any of those, if you have a disaster, you are going to probably have issues getting a good RTO or an RPO, and it will be impacted. So we need to get these created today and work with Tom to get you a BIA in place.
Yep, that's a good point. So to get started with the BIA, to do all of that, since that's what we're here to understand today, we need to identify who should be involved, right? We need to allocate time. So this is not something that it's just, here, fill this out, and you just sort of wing it, right? You need to make sure that you're allowing enough time to thoroughly investigate this. Honestly, it's probably a bit of a hassle, right? You sit down in this exercise and it's going to be a lengthy thing. It's going to take some time, and we're all busy, but you need to understand it from an impact standpoint. Take the time now, do it properly, because it could save you in the long run. And then hopefully as time goes by, it wouldn't be difficult to adjust as you make changes to your organization. So just be sure that you're allocating the time. Tom, how do people engage a vCIO?
To engage us specifically, it's that email address at the bottom there, marketing@dataprise.com. But I'd love to just go through this a little bit further in the fact that, yes, unfortunately, Kelly, there is a lot of time needed. And just a real world example, I'm dealing with a municipality, a county, and we've had to do, this workshop 3 different sessions because we just couldn't get through all the different applications that they needed to ensure that they had this business impact analysis done for in one session. So it was a good 3-4 hours worth of work. And again, in that sense, and the identifier should be involved. Not only was it, the director of IT for this county, but it was the county executive. It was people handling, the medical and emergency services. And to kind of put that to your company, it could be different business unit owners or different application owners within your business that, need to be part of this as well. So, when you engage a vCIO, when you come to us, these are the things that, we're going to have to all put together, get that time from all of those people. But what we found through this process is there's certain gaps identified that, I kind of spoke to a little bit earlier that these people weren't aware of. And so it's been, very enlightening to them, helpful to them, valuable to them. And then, from there, they can make those decisions, as Stephen spoke about, as to what's most important to remediate and what necessarily, what gap might not need to be quote unquote fixed. As the slide says, we can help.
Yeah, and it's always good to have a fresh set of eyes, third party kind of come in and look at things. We kind of get nose blind, if you will, to our own environments, right? So having somebody else come in and poke around and ask questions will often be a good help there.
Awesome, guys. That was really helpful information. I do have just a handful of questions that I'll toss out there. I think they're mostly geared towards Tom, but okay. Kelly and Stephen, feel free to weigh in if you want to. When you are preparing for like one of these workshops, what types of financial information do you need before you get started to really streamline it? Are there documents that you need to prepare prior to it? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I'm less concerned on the financial side, and I'm more concerned on the actual gaps themselves, because as you go through it, you will notice that there are certain things that you don't realize when it goes down, that there isn't a necessarily a backup solution or, a way to narrow those objectives, those return time objectives, the recovery time objectives to the recovery time actuals. That being said, anything we can gain from you on that lost revenue side, we'll certainly ask of it, but there's not major preparation on that point. We can kind of adjust those numbers more on the fly. There's, again, to me, there's certain things that are more important, the actual potential gaps themselves.
So I'll just build on that. Do you provide a list of things that folks need to bring to the workshop?
No, but what we will ask prior to a workshop is what are the actual services and applications they are concerned about. And again, this is part of, as Kelly was asking, how when you engage us, and there's certain ways we can do these exercises, it doesn't have to be for every service and every application. There are some clientele that is what I'm doing. I've got a list of 30, 40 different applications that I'm working with them on and identifying gaps on. But there are others where just to kind of get a feeling and kind of get the training again of what we can do and how we can then, kind of hand it over to them for them to do moving forward, and we kind of get out of their way, is they can give us, 2 or 3 or 4 top applications, top services that they're most concerned about. And then we can, continue the workshops and the business impact analysis from there. So what I would ask prior to is, to identify what those particular services and applications are. And that's all I would need.
Question number 2. So I imagine more is not great in this situation of trying to put this together, but ideally, do you have a recommendation of how many people should be involved when creating the business impact analysis?
Again, I don't mind more. Obviously, that is an administrative nightmare. But that aside, the more people involved, it does maybe lengthen the process, but it gets more people to understand these actual impacts. When you're talking about a business unit owner, someone who he may know his application, but he doesn't understand how that impacts the business as a whole. And you get them in the same room with some of the other people that are discussing these things. And what I've seen in the past is I can step back a bit and let them kind of talk about the challenges of trying to, remediate those gaps and narrow those gaps. And it's not, when they realize, it's not just the click of a button or we just throw money at something, but there's a lot more involved into, resolving some of these potential issues. More and more gets kind of fleshed out, and the company as a whole ends up kind of just understanding each other and other business units and their ways of working together a little bit better. So sometimes it has an impact greater than just a business impact analysis. So yeah, I have no issue and no problem with, if there's a certain list of applications, all the business unit owners or the application owners of those, as well as the director of IT. And then, if they want to get a CEO and a CFO involved as well.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about the hidden benefits of going through the process. So very fun. Last question I have here is, are the IT services provided by Dataprise remote services, or can you handle large implementation projects on-prem?
We can do both. We have staff around. If there's a necessity where we need to do something and we need to go somewhere, we can certainly provide staffing on-prem, not just within the DC area, but nationwide at this point. And also, depending on the nature of what it might be, we can certainly get people to travel and to do what's necessary, but we can certainly handle both.
Awesome. Kelly, Stephen, any questions from you that you forgot to ask?
I don't think so.
No, I think Tom's answered pretty much everything I had.
Well, good job, Tom. You get a gold star today.
All right. Good stuff.
All right. Well, I think that's a wrap for today. We appreciate everyone who joined us. If you'd like to hear more from Tom, he is headlining at our next Dataprise webinar, September 28th, where he'll be speaking on smart 2023 budgeting tips on how to get what you need. Sounds like a really important one to go see. So if you have any questions about today's discussion or want to discover more about working with a vCIO, please contact me at marketing@dataprise.com. You can also find all of our previous webinars. Kelly alluded to a couple of good ones. And of course, register to be notified of our future webinars at globaldatavault.com/webinars, or you can follow us on any of the social channels at Global Data Vault. Thanks again.